I'm Scott Britt, and I'm the karate instructor for National Fitness Center of Oak Ridge. Welcome to this week's video where we're going to talk about statistics of fighting and how they should affect your training. Once again, to get a complete class, please combine this video with the Chart 1 video, the Chart 2 video, the Core Katas videos, especially since this class will be more of a instructional than a physical doing video. There are several different studies that have been done on statistics of fighting. So in this day and age when a lot of fights just happen to be captured by bystanders with cell phones, it's actually made for a really good tool to see how street fights actually happen versus how what people imagine should happen. So a few of those that I want to share with you, and there's several different studies. I'll mention them as I go. This one is actually a government study that was done on police reports over 2010. They're looking at all the compilation of all the different reports that police have had of assault or fights. So of those, there's two different categories. Attacker known to the victim and attacker not known to the victim. So attacker known to the victim is about 60% of the time. Not known to the victim is about 39% of the time. Alright? So more often than not, if two people are in a fight, they're probably going to know each other. Which makes an interesting point for your training. When you see a fight and you don't know who's involved and you don't know how it started, I personally would be very cautious about getting involved in the middle of that, because you don't know who is the good guy in that fight, if there is one. Alright? They may have just both been acting foolishly. Alright? And there's not really a good guy in that situation. Or you might have bystanders that are the family members of those people that are going to jump in and attack you if you try to step in and help or do anything. So my preference in that situation, unless it looks like someone's life is on the line, will be to call 911, get a policeman there with the tools to take care of the situation and the authority. So, of the altercations, about 63% of them did not involve a weapon. That's for unknown to victim. For those that were known, it's about 77%. So, unknown to victim, about 10% involved a gun, about 7% involved a knife. So, to my mind, that should kind of give you an idea of how much of your training you should devote to these different categories. You should not just look at hand techniques, but you shouldn't be so focused on gun or knife that you focus on them to exclusion of everything else. So maybe 15% of your training is devoted to weapons defense, which would seem reasonable according to the probability of what you might face. About 37% were simple assault, so two people got in an argument, something of that nature. About 19% was involved in a robbery, and there's an interesting one on that one. We'll get to that here in a few minutes. And there's a few other categories here as well. I'll have the snapshot of this at the end of the video so you kind of get a picture of everything. Now, 71.5% involved one person. And two or more attackers made it 28%, 28.5%. So that means multiple attackers should be part of your training. It should be part of what you're thinking about. Not only in what do I do when I'm facing two people, alright, the different strategies that we've talked about for that. Moving to keep one of them between you and the other at all times. Moving back into an open doorway so that only one can attack you at a time. Constantly keeping on the move, alright, so they can't corner you down or surround you. but also keeping in your mind during a fight that I'm only fighting one person at the moment. I need to be aware of my surroundings in case someone else joins. Alright? So don't be so focused on your single current attacker that you miss potential other attackers coming in. And that can very well happen if you're fighting someone and their friend sees it and starts to come over. So keep that in your mind as you're training. When you train, yes, fight this person, but be aware of potential exits, people surrounding you, things you might trip over, improvised weapons that might be around. A lot of things to be aware of other than just your attacker. So, about 17.5% resulted in a minor injury. 4% roughly was a serious injury. Fighting is not a guarantee. I don't care what your level of training is. If you're in a fight, there is no guarantee that you will not be hurt. So I would prefer to never get in a fight. Period. That would be my absolute preference. Because you need to realize what your goal is. Your goal is to keep yourself safe. And if that means being a better fighter against someone who's attacking you, then that's what it means. But if it means walking away from a situation, you've just achieved your goal. You've just kept yourself safe, and you still win. Alright? So, moving on down, for homicides, fights that resulted in death of one person. 75% of the offenders were known to the victim. That's not great. For strangers, 19% were during a robbery, and 24% were during an argument. So, during a robbery, and during an argument. So for me, for my training, that means something went wrong. Alright? That means that wasn't most likely, those were avoidable deaths. Alright? So if someone wants my wallet, I will give them my wallet. And then later, I will call the police and file a report, and they will track him down and arrest him, again with their tools of the trade and their authority. Alright? I'm not going to risk my life over my car, my wallet, any possession. Alright? So, I will only get in a fight if it's to protect my immediate health and life. And 24% were during an argument. So, the old saying is, it takes two people to argue. So, part of your training, part of your thought process, part of your imagining different scenarios should involve de-escalation. That is a martial arts skill. That is a skill to keep you safe. So, if someone is extremely angry, how do you talk to them without making the situation even more tense? Alright? So, simple things like avoiding the word you. Alright? Talking about the situation and not the person. Alright? So, if a person feels attacked, then they're going to try to combat. They're going to try to come back. If you talk about the situation, they can defend an action or a situation. But if you start attacking them personally, that's where things start to degrade to where they feel that violence is the last option available to them. Alright? So people resort to punches and kicks when they feel that words have stopped working. Alright? So, if you do get in a conversation with someone who is very angry, one of the keys is you don't have to agree with somebody. Alright? You don't have to cave in to what they're saying, but it is important that you let them know that they're being completely heard and understood. So, let them speak. Alright? Keep your voice level. Don't yell over them. Alright? Let them speak. Repeat back to them what they said. Paraphrase what they said. And then present your point. Alright? Let them know that they were heard and understood. And that will go a long way towards de-escalating and stopping a situation from involving violence. So, so that is that source. Now, I want to mention a lot of times when you start talking about statistics in martial arts, a lot of people who are really in favor of grappling and ground fighting and all that will talk about statistics about how most fights or almost all fights go to the ground. Alright? So, I want to start this by saying I am not against grappling. Grappling is a needed skill. Alright? However, the statistic that they're often quoting are police statistics, where a policeman has had an encounter with somebody who resisted, who got in a fight with the policeman. So, yes, those policemen are trained to take that person to the ground as to have a better chance of controlling that person without causing permanent damage, where they can use locks, pins, get their handcuffs out. That's what they're trained to do. So yes, a lot of their fights are going to go to the ground. Alright? However, when we start looking at some of these other statistics that would apply more to martial artists, to people using self-defense, the statistics are a little bit more skewed on that one. Alright? So go into some of those. There's, I'm going to be quoting from all three of these different studies, but again, I'll put up the information at the end of this video so that you have the set of full studies if you want to go back and review them from their source. So the first was Martial Planet Forum, where they reviewed 100 video clips of fights. So like someone on the sidelines getting a cell phone video of a fight taking place, something of that nature. The second study is August 2012 Black Belt Magazine that looked at 50 videos. And the last is Real Fighting, Real Facts book by Darren Warren, where he analyzed 100 videotaped fights as well. So, on these, the first one from 2009 stated that only 12% of the fights ended up on the ground. Which, if I was in a fight out on the street in self-defense, that is what I would want. Would be not to go on the ground as much as possible. Because remember, 28.5% of fights involve more than one person. And you may not know that it involves more than one person until later in the fight. Alright? Because I know of stories of people who have been in fights and then suddenly someone comes up from a blind spot or comes up to the side and starts joining in. Alright? So, in a grappling match, grappling matches are horrible against multiple opponents. If I'm going to be facing multiple fighters, I want to be standing to where I can move and move quickly to where they can't surround me or to where I only face one at a time. So, MMA is a good example. MMA has a lot of punching and kicks, and it has a lot of ground fighting. But that's what works for those sets of rules. Because you're cage fighting. If there was no cage, and there's a possibility that people from the audience might just randomly come up and join in, their strategy would change, and I bet you would see a lot less voluntary ground fighting. Alright? So, now, the other study, let me see here. That was the lower study, I'll grant you, that was the lower study. The study that only looked at 50 videos saw 52% of the fights end up on the ground. The other one, that 70 to 100 videos, saw 27% on the ground. So, grappling is an important skill. I don't think it's one that I would focus on exclusively, but it is one that should be included in your martial arts. It should not be solely punching and kicking and things of that nature. You at least need to know, you don't want to go to the ground, but you need to know what to do once you get there. Once you involuntarily go to the ground, you need to know what to do so you can protect yourself and then get back up to where you can get to an exit, or at least be the one standing, which is always the best option. So let's see, what else do we have? Oh, yes. So out of this particular study, out of 82 winners, all right, where there was a clear defined winner, 75 won with hand strikes to the head. The other 7 were won in different various ways, but only after repeated hand strikes to the head first. Let's look at another study. This one here, 90% of all techniques were punches. Only 3% were decided by chokes. So that tells me that the majority of what I'm going to need to know how to defend against are going to be punches. So that should be a focus of my training, which is what you'll see in chart 1. A lot of different ways to block straight punches, hook punches, and how to return fire. Alright? So that should be a focus of your training, because that's most likely what you're going to encounter. Now, this particular study broke it down a little bit, which I really like. The Black Belt Magazine one. It said 78% of fights started with a punch. So almost 8% of the fights started with a punch. 85% of the time, that was with the right hand. And 97% of the time, it was a punch to the head. So now you know a really, really good chance that if a fight starts, it's probably going to start with a right hand punch to the head. So, with that little secret bit of knowledge, you can have a whole arsenal to block, counter, throw, strike, whatever you want to do from that initial attack. Alright? Now, this same study, looking at the entire fight, there was only a grab, hold, or a lock 10% of the time. Which would kind of make sense, because most likely street fights are going to be with untrained people who just got mad. Alright? So a highly trained martial artist who knows what can happen, what kind of bodily harm can happen, will probably not voluntarily get involved in the street fight. So it's kind of like the fact that most people who really know a whole lot about outdoor survival and all of that are rarely the ones that get lost in the woods. So, funny how that works. Hold or lock 10% of the time, and a kick of any kind 8% of the time. 8% of the time. Whereas in styles like isshin-ryu, it's about 50-50. 50% punches, 50% kicks. So what that means for you, if you can, especially if you're throwing some punches to get their hands up, get their eyes up, a kick could most likely be very unexpected and have a good chance of disabling your attacker, or taking their mind off even, just to get their hands lowered, and then you can start punching again. So 75% of those kicks were below the knee, which I don't agree with below the knee. I think all of your kicks should be to the knee or to the groin, but never anything higher than the groin. Alright? Tournament is great. Tournament, do head kicks, all you want. For a street fight, please, please, please do not throw anything above the groin. Alright? Knee and groin should be your only 2 targets for kicks, and they're rather effective targets. I have first-hand experience showing off when I was first starting out in training, throwing a high kick, and I found out in front of my friends that when you throw a high kick and you're standing on gravel, your other foot can flip right out from underneath you. So, yeah, that wasn't a fun day. So yes, keep your kicks low when you're in a self-defense situation. This one study, the Real Fighting Real Facts, said that the average length was about 66 seconds, with about 30% in the 20 to 40 second range. So that's pretty long. Alright? I would hope that none of your fights would ever last that long. So the old SAS saying is, any fight that lasts over 5 seconds has no winner. So when you get in an altercation, you want to do your best to stay out of a fight. But once you get into a fight, you should be all out. You should flip your switch and go completely ballistic until there's no more threat, which should ideally be a few seconds. Alright? So, let me see. This is interesting, and this is a statistic that was borne out in another study I'll tell you about. An average of 22 techniques for the winner, alright? Only 53% of which landed. That's not a good number. Hopefully, with you and your training, you'll be able to do much better than 53%, alright? And 11 techniques, half as many that the losers threw, of which 35% landed. Alright? So I can read that statistic as aggression. So if you do get in the fight, be very aggressive. Alright? Don't be passive. This isn't a tournament where you throw 1, 2, 3, back up and let them throw a few, then you come back in 1, 2, 3, where you take turns. That's not the case in a self-defense situation. You go all out, non-stop. Don't give them a chance to breathe until there's no more threat. And this statistic was actually borne out in a very large scientific paper that was done that looked at all these statistics for the history of MMA. They looked at every professional fight to try to figure out how to predict a winner. So what can we do to predict who's going to win a fight ahead of time, which for a huge sport like that, there's a lot of interest. So they looked at age, height, weight, number of previous wins. Alright? None of those were statistically significant. None of those were a determining factor in predicting who won. The determining factor was percentage of, or ratio of strikes. Whoever threw the most strikes had the higher likelihood of winning, which translates to aggression. If I throw 100 strikes and you throw 20, and I only land 20, right? That's not a good number, but you only threw 20 total. So if you only land 10, I've landed more strikes on you than you have on me, alright? So, and if we're playing Mortal Kombat, then your bar is all the way down. Okay, never mind. So, being aggressive, throwing the most strikes, is a huge predictor in who will win a fight. So don't worry too much about throwing the perfect strike. Work on throwing so many strikes that they're so busy covered up they don't know what to do, and then one of them happens to land them on the ground. Alright? Every strike you throw should have the potential to end the fight. It should be to an important target, a vital point. And you just keep going non-stop until one of them actually does end the fight. So that should be your general strategy for a self-defense situation. Let's see. Most common techniques. Back arm cross, wild hook, alright, or haymaker, front arm jab, alright. Those are the three highest or most common techniques, followed by uppercut and basic low kick. Of the winners, about 25% were larger. So, in your training, think in your mind, I'm probably going to face someone bigger than me. What do I need to do? I need to be mentally prepared to not shrink back if someone's bigger than me. And what kind of techniques do I need to do to stop that kind of person? All right? So a punch to the chest, probably not going to stop someone bigger than you. All right? That's where you need to start working on eyes, throat, groin, nose, pressure points. Well, we'll get to pressure points in another class. But those kinds of things you need to be thinking about in your training and in your scenarios. This particular study, starting techniques, right hand was 57%. Of those, 90% was across. 74% of initial attacks directed at the face. So the numbers are slightly different, but the message is still the same. The majority is going to be a right hand cross, probably aimed towards the head. All right. So I hope that these statistics help to give you an idea of the likelihood of facing different scenarios. I do want to mention that these are statistics for actual fights. So hopefully the statistic of you actually getting in a fight, it will be 1 in 1,000. Because you're trained, you're aware of your surroundings, you know how to de-escalate situations, and you're not going to voluntarily get into an altercation. So I really enjoyed talking with you all today. Again, make sure you sign up for a Thursday training session if you haven't already. And as always, I look forward to seeing you all again in person. Thank you so much, and God bless.